Chosen one, there is a reason your life went quiet when everyone else grew loud, a reason the rooms emptied without explanation, a reason the messages stopped, the invitations faded, and the warmth you once poured into others was no longer returned to you. And at first you interpreted it as rejection. You told yourself you had done something wrong. You wondered which version of you was no longer acceptable. You mistook the silence for punishment. But what if I told you it was never rejection, never abandonment, never loss, but protection unfolding in real time? Because what feels like loneliness to the mind is containment to the spirit. What feels like being cut off is actually being set apart. Heaven did not remove people from your life to wound you. It removed them to shield you, because your energy reached a frequency that could no longer remain exposed to careless hands and unclean intentions. And understand this clearly. The enemy does not fear noise. It does not fear crowds or chaos or distraction. The enemy fears clarity, and clarity is not born in company. It is forged in isolation, sharpened in stillness, refined when there is no one left to mirror you, validate you, or distract you from your own inner authority. This is the phase where your intuition becomes louder than opinions, where discernment replaces approval, where you stop leaking energy into places that cannot carry your weight. And this is why it had to get quiet, because there is a new power that only awakens when distractions are removed, a power that does not announce itself, does not perform, does not chase, a power so precise, so contained, that it becomes untouchable, untraceable, and yes, even the adversary studies it from a distance, because the devil does not learn from strength, it learns from restraint. It watches how you no longer react, how you no longer explain yourself, how you move without broadcasting, how you feel deeply without bleeding publicly. And it realizes something has changed. You are no longer accessible in the ways you once were. Your boundaries have become spiritual armor. Your solitude has become strategy, and your silence has become authority. So before we go any deeper, I need you to anchor this moment. Comment, "I am chosen" below, not for me, but to remind your own nervous system who you are becoming. Like this video to seal the message. Subscribe, because these transmissions are not random. They arrive exactly when your spirit is ready. And now let's dive deeper. Because this quiet season is not the end of your story. It is the calibration before elevation. The moment where heaven teaches you how to stand alone, so that when you are seen again, you are no longer available to be diminished, distracted, or drained. Point 1. Why your loneliness intensified instead of fading. Chosen one, most people feel lonely because they lack connection, because they are searching outward for something that was never cultivated inward. You feel lonely because connection was removed, deliberately, surgically, with precision. There is a difference. Your solitude did not begin when people disappeared. It began the moment your tolerance for misalignment ended. At some point, quietly, and without ceremony, you stopped leaking energy into conversations that went nowhere. You stopped over-explaining your truth to people who only listened to respond, not to understand. You stopped performing emotional labor for those who benefited from your presence, but were never willing to rise to your depth. And the instant that shift occurred, the environment recalibrated itself around you. Relationships that were built on convenience, access, and emotional extraction could not survive your stillness. When you stopped chasing harmony at the cost of self-betrayal, the false bonds dissolved on their own. Loneliness entered your life not as absence, but as compression. Compression is not punishment, it is preparation. Compression is what turns carbon into diamonds under pressure. Compression is what strengthens muscle fibers through resistance. Compression is what sharpens instinct until it matures into intuition. You were not isolated because you failed socially. You were separated because your perception was being refined. The noise had to go, not because it was evil, but because it was inefficient for who you were becoming. Distractions dilute discernment, and you were entering a phase where clarity mattered more than comfort. In solitude, you began to hear what was always drowned out, the subtle warnings, the inner confirmations, the quiet knowing that doesn't need applause to be true. Without the constant feedback of others, your nervous system recalibrated. Your standards rose. Your discernment became unforgiving. You no longer mistook familiarity for alignment or attention for love. This season stripped away external validation so you could anchor internally. What feels like loneliness is actually the narrowing of your energetic field, the closing of unnecessary doors so the right ones can be recognized instantly when they appear. You are not empty, you are concentrated. You are not abandoned, you are being repositioned. This solitude is not a void, it is a chamber, and inside it, your vision is being sharpened, your boundaries are being fortified, and your spirit is learning to stand without leaning. When connection returns, it will not drain you, it will meet you. Point 2. The divine protection phase disguised as isolation. There is a season in the chosen one's life where heaven does not bless by addition, but by subtraction. And this is the season you are in now, whether you consciously recognize it or not. God did not surround you with more people because more people would have diluted your clarity, blurred your discernment, and fragmented the precision of what He is building within you. Instead, He placed a perimeter around your spirit, an unseen boundary that filters access, energy, and influence. You may have noticed that conversations began to feel draining even when they were harmless on the surface, that social environments started to feel heavy without any obvious reason, that laughter felt hollow, that noise felt invasive, and that you needed more silence, more space, and more time alone just to feel balanced again. This is not withdrawal, and it is not depression, and it is not isolation born of fear. This is recalibration. This is your inner world being retuned to a higher frequency that cannot coexist with constant interference. Protection rarely feels like celebration. It does not arrive with applause or reassurance. It feels like restriction. It feels like confinement. It feels like doors quietly closing and invitations mysteriously stopping. But containment is how power is stabilized before it is released. God does not expose what is still being fortified. He does not showcase what is still being sharpened. You were being protected from emotional entanglements that would have delayed your maturation, from conversations that would have planted doubt instead of wisdom, and from distractions that would have confused your discernment at the very moment it was becoming precise. You were being shielded from attachments that would have drained the authority now forming within you. Authority that cannot be rushed, borrowed, or taught, only forged through silence and obedience. This is why your tolerance for shallow energy has disappeared. This is why you no longer feel the need to explain yourself. This is why solitude no longer feels empty but necessary. God is not punishing you by removing people. He is preserving you by refining access. What feels like loneliness is actually insulation. What feels like stillness is alignment. What feels like loss is preparation. When this season completes its work, you will not return the same. You will emerge clearer, calmer, more discerning and unshakable, because the noise that once competed for your attention no longer has permission to reach you. Point 3. The new power you mastered without training for it. Chosen one, the power you developed in this season is subtle, and because it is subtle, it is dangerous to those who rely on chaos. It does not announce itself loudly, it does not demand attention, and it does not seek validation. It operates quietly, beneath the surface, where true power has always lived. You mastered emotional sovereignty. You no longer react impulsively when provoked, criticized, or misunderstood. Where others explode, collapse, or defend themselves emotionally, you pause. You feel. You observe. You allow information to rise before you respond. This alone separates you from the majority of people because most live as prisoners of their emotional reflexes, reacting before thinking, speaking before understanding, and moving before discerning. Emotional sovereignty means no one can rush you, guilt you, provoke you, or pressure you into abandoning your center. Their urgency no longer becomes your emergency. Their emotions no longer hijack your nervous system. You remain rooted, steady, and internally anchored, even when the external environment is unstable. This is why manipulators grew restless around you. They could not pull you into emotional loops. They could not bait you into reactions. They could not use confusion, fear, or urgency as leverage anymore. This is why emotionally unstable people felt exposed in your presence. Without you saying a single word, their lack of self-control became visible. You no longer mirror their dysfunction back to them. You no longer absorb, amplify, or participate in their chaos. You hold a steady frequency, and steady frequencies reveal instability without accusation, without explanation, and without confrontation. This is deeply unsettling to those who survive by emotional noise. This power was not given easily. It was born in loneliness because loneliness forced you to sit with yourself long enough to become self-regulated. In silence, you learned your triggers. In isolation, you learned your patterns. In stillness, you learned how to feel without being ruled by feeling. While others avoided themselves through distraction, you faced yourself fully. And now, you move through the world with an inner calm that cannot be shaken. This is why you are no longer easily controlled. This is why your presence changes rooms. This is why chaos avoids you or exposes itself around you. You did not become louder, harsher, or colder. You became centered. And that is the most dangerous power of all. Point 4. Why the enemy studies you instead of attacking directly. The enemy does not study weakness because weakness collapses on its own. What requires strategy, patience, and observation is resilience. What demands attention is restraint. What triggers unease in the unseen realm is transformation that does not announce itself. You were never meant to survive loudly. You were meant to evolve quietly. You were placed in environments designed to harden you in the wrong way, to make you bitter, reactive, defensive, sharp-edged. You were supposed to absorb the poison and become toxic yourself. You were supposed to grow cold, cynical, emotionally unavailable, mistrustful of everything good. Instead, something unexpected happened. You grew discerning. You learned how to observe without absorbing. You learned how to listen without agreeing. You learned how to say no without explaining yourself to people who were never owed access to your inner world. You learned how to disengage without resentment, how to step back without needing to prove your innocence, how to walk away without demanding closure from those who would only weaponize it against you. This is the kind of growth that unsettles dark forces because it cannot be baited. A person who cannot be emotionally hijacked cannot be spiritually manipulated. When reactions dry up, control evaporates. When triggers lose their power, influence collapses. The enemy relies on urgency, on emotional spikes, on unhealed wounds that can be pressed like buttons. You removed the buttons. You stopped performing pain. You stopped explaining your boundaries. You stopped narrating your healing. And in that stillness, authority formed. The devil does not fear loud faith that announces itself for validation. He fears quiet authority that moves without permission. He fears the one who does not argue, does not chase, does not defend, does not need to be believed in order to remain anchored. He fears embodiment. He fears discipline. He fears self-control that has been tested and refined through pressure. Your silence became your shield because it denied access. Your restraint became your weapon because it conserved power. You learned that not every battle is meant to be fought, not every truth is meant to be spoken, and not every door deserves a final explanation when it closes. This is not withdrawal. This is mastery. This is what happens when survival matures into sovereignty. This is why the enemy watches you carefully now, not because you are weak, but because you're no longer predictable. Point 5. Why relationships collapsed even when you tried to hold them together. Some connections ended not because they were toxic, but because they were outdated, and what once fit your life no longer aligned with the person you were becoming. You outgrew versions of yourself that needed those bonds for validation, safety, or a sense of belonging, and as you expanded, those relationships could not expand with you. You were no longer meant to be the healer, the fixer, or the emotional anchor for people who refuse to evolve or take responsibility for their own growth. At some point, your soul recognized that love should not require exhaustion, and your nervous system began rejecting dynamics that demanded self-betrayal in exchange for peace. You started feeling drained after conversations, heavy after interactions, and restless in spaces that once felt familiar. And that was not confusion. It was clarity arriving in the body before the mind could explain it. This is not arrogance. This is maturity. This is discernment earned through experience. When a chosen one rises, old contracts expire without apology. Access changes because energy must be protected. Familiarity dissolves because comfort is no longer the goal. Alignment is. People who benefited from your previous level will feel uncomfortable with your current one. Not because you became cold, but because you became clear. They may call you distant because you stopped over-explaining. They may call you changed because you stopped shrinking. They may say you abandoned them when, in truth, you finally stopped abandoning yourself. And they are correct. You did change. You changed because staying the same would have meant spiritual stagnation. You changed because survival demanded evolution. You changed because growth required release. This is what happens when self-respect replaces people-pleasing, when boundaries replace guilt, and when inner peace becomes more valuable than external approval. What ended was not love, it was dependency. What closed was not connection, it was access. And what emerged was a version of you that no longer negotiates their worth just to be understood. Point 6. What this season is training you for internally. This phase is not about external achievement, it is about internal command, the slow and deliberate construction of a self that does not wobble when the room goes quiet. You are learning how to move without seeking validation, how to take a step forward without checking who is watching, how to trust your perception even when no one confirms it and no applause follows. This is the discipline of self-trust, forged in moments where doubt whispers the loudest and reassurance is absent. You are also learning how to remain grounded when you are misunderstood, when your silence is misread, when your restraint is mistaken for weakness. These moments are not accidents. They are training. These are leadership muscles being built beneath the surface, invisible to others, but undeniable to you. Authority does not come from being followed, praised, or echoed by the crowd. It comes from being centered, from knowing who you are when no one is reflecting you back to yourself. You are being conditioned to stand alone so that when you are finally seen, you are not dependent on applause, approval, or permission. You're learning to regulate your emotions, to think clearly under isolation, to act with precision instead of impulse. This is how true influence is built, not through noise, but through presence, not through urgency, but through patience, not through performance, but through inner alignment. When the world eventually turns its attention toward you, it will not be because you demanded it, but because your steadiness altered the atmosphere. You are becoming someone whose calm speaks louder than words, whose silence carries weight, whose decisions are not reactive but rooted. This is quiet power. This is unseen preparation. This is mastery forming internally, long before the external world catches up. Point 7. What follows the loneliness and how to recognize it. When this season completes, you will not rush into connection. You will recognize alignment by how calm it feels. No emotional spikes, no anxiety, no confusion. The next people in your life will not need access to your wounds to feel close to you. They will meet you at your stability, not your struggle. Recognition will replace explanation. Presence will replace performance. And when connection returns, it will not feel consuming. It will feel supportive. Chosen one, you were never abandoned. You were insulated. The loneliness was not rejection. It was refinement. And now that you have mastered containment, clarity, and emotional sovereignty, you are prepared for the level of responsibility your soul has always carried. Comment, "I am chosen," once more if this resonates. Like this transmission. Subscribe to remain aligned. What comes next will not be loud, but it will be undeniable.